And welcome back. Now, the South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners has made recommendations on how future infrastructure projects should be implemented to ensure transformation in the property sector. Now, one of them is that all developers who submit projects to government must commit to procuring 40% of all materials and services from black and female-owned companies. The practitioners were reacting to the multi-billion rand Mooikloof Mega City development and other state-owned housing projects in general. So to talk to us more about this, we're joined by Tholo Makhaola, who's the president of the South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners. Thanks so much for your time and welcome to Morning Live.
Thank you very much, Sakina, and thank you very much for having us.
First off, Mr. Makhaola, how would you describe in general transformation and the inclusion of black property developers or practitioners in the property sector at the moment?
Sakina, currently as it stands, I think the stats are around about the fact that the property industry accounts for 6 trillion rand, and of that 6 trillion rand, 7% of that space is occupied by black developers or property practitioners. So I think those stats on their own are quite bad.
But what seems to be the problem? What are these barriers to transformation? An organization like your own was founded in 1996, for example. So what have you noticed as trends over that time?
Sakina, I think the reality which we have identified as being the biggest barriers have been access to finance and access to land. So it only goes to say that if you own the means of production, so to call it, then obviously it only makes sense that the downstream benefits will be felt by people within your network. You know, the reality of the fact is that white people are the ones who have access to finance, they have access to land, and as a result, the people that are being given the most opportunities are kind of those in their direct networks. So what we're saying is, if black people would have more access to land and more access to finance, then the downstream benefits for black property practitioners would result.
But why is that the case? Why is it that there is still a struggle when you have a black government in place for South Africa, as it were? As I say, your organization, for example, was established in 1996. So you've been at the coalface of this ever since we've had this transition to a democratic dispensation in South Africa. So why haven't you seen the sort of transformation happening that you're talking about? Why haven't you been able to access land, for example, where government should have been able to assist?
Sakina, I think the reality is that just in terms of the kind of structural aspects of the economy, the way I think black people to date have really been had unfair kind of lending practices towards them from the banks, I think, which has really been a kind of a big hindrance. Black people have really, more than anything else, developed these skills. But I think in our mind, it really is kind of really around access to the finance and land really being at the core of our struggle. And I think the land issue is an issue that continues to be debated in South Africa, and access and access to that land. Programs that government does have in place to assist citizens in terms of getting access to that land. A lot of those programs are kind of more aimed towards agricultural activities and not necessarily around property development opportunities for black people.
So I'm curious, having listened to what you have to say, Mr. Makhaola, about your engagements with government. What have those been since, especially the expansion of the Public Works Department and also the changes that have been made in subsequent years? Talk to us about your engagement with the authorities.
So I think SAIBPP really has seen itself as a transformation partner. We really have had a lot of involvement in terms of assisting government in terms of the formulation of various policies. We've had the PMTE program, which was done through Public Works. We have had several engagements through human settlements. So our engagement with the authorities is it has been ongoing. However, the biggest issue that we've kind of found is with the changing of various ministers, we've found that sometimes we've kind of end up going around in circles in terms of having to repeat certain engagements in as far as the progress that you might find that in a certain with certain figureheads in ministries are concerned.
So what are your impressions on government sustainable infrastructure development system and I suppose the methodology and also government's approach, the new approach to infrastructure and infrastructure development?
Look, I think definitely President Cyril Ramaphosa, we really applaud him for at the time during COVID, he did mention that we were going to undertake an infrastructure-led economic recovery strategy, and I think we'd really like to applaud him for that. And I think with the gazetting of the projects, the SIDS program, and the strategic integrated projects, we really think that they are on the right path in as far as that's concerned. However, I think our concern that we've raised has simply been around the fact that we just need to make sure that the transformation ambitions and objectives that government has set for themselves through BEE are achieved.
Let's talk to those objectives and your satisfaction or perhaps the lack thereof in terms of what has been put aside.
So I really think in terms of projects like these, and I think what we've, in our engagement, I think Dr. Makhaola did also mention on your show yesterday that we are currently, we did have an initial engagement with his office, and we are going to sit down through the Black Business Council to actually thresh out these further. I think our only issue around these projects in particular is simply that government has not communicated what those transformational objectives are. I think it's all good and well to kind of mention those after the fact once projects like Mooikloof have been launched. However, I think it's what we're saying is it's very important for government to take us into their confidence and for them to be quite clear in terms of what their targets are. So for them to kind of make blanket statements like there are transformational objectives that they are going to meet, we just need to be clear what those numbers are and what those targets are so that they can be held to account for those targets. I think as it stands currently, we aren't 100% sure what those targets are that government has set for themselves. So therefore, it makes it very difficult to measure.
Okay, so that's interesting because President Cyril Ramaphosa launched that Mooikloof Mega City development recently. So when exactly, it's a massive project, we're talking about 50,000 residential units. When exactly did you get to hear about this before the launch?
So I think what we had was they were the 50-odd projects that Dr. Makhaola did mention that were gazetted. Under those strategic integrated projects, you had 18 projects that are listed under human settlements as SIP24. And so those projects are simply listed as they're simply listed as projects. The Mooikloof Mega City development, we only really heard about over the past weekend when it was launched. However, I think, I really just like to qualify that I think as an organization, we really have acknowledged that what needs to happen is that we need to kind of take a deep dive to really understand that when projects like these are gazetted, that the onus then becomes on us to actually go out and to start investigating what each of these projects actually entails, and for us to maybe intervene at appropriate times and not to only find out kind of after the fact and after these projects have been launched. But I think I think as Dr. Makhaola did say, it was quite a complicated process in terms of the different vehicles that have brought this particular project to fruition. But as the projects currently stand, being gazetted, they are simply listed by their names. So I think there is definitely an onus on ourselves to kind of go in, understand who the developers are and what the targets are, the transformational targets more than anything else are that have been set for each individual project.
So you see, Mr. Makhaola, we can sit here and be surprised at what Dr. Makhaola tells us about how this project came together, how the major player, who is now Baldwin, comes into this project a month before it is launched. But I don't think you should get a free pass. You are representing at least 2,500 members. And you are not aware of such a mega project? And you don't have a say in terms of how this transformation agenda that you are seemingly so concerned about is actually applied in terms of this. I think you are letting down your members as well.
No, I mean, I think as we've considered, Sakina, I think there is definitely an onus. I think it's the way in which these projects were gazetted, and I think, as I said, as an organization, there is definitely an onus on us to have gone to have taken a deep dive and definitely tried to understand these what these projects entail. I think just to give it context, I think what Dr. Ramokgopa did say is that a lot of these projects were private projects, and when government called for developers to submit projects that were, I think the word that's used in the industry is shovel ready. And so these projects were the ones that were submitted to the office. And I think you need to understand that if, just the way that kind of development works is that private developers will have already been doing a lot of work with their kind of set professional teams beforehand. So by the time that they then submit these projects to the office of Dr. Ramokgopa, these projects would have been in quite advanced stages. So I think it's definitely a balancing act. Yes, there is an onus on us to take a deep dive and to understand what these projects entail. But I think from our side, there really was no opportunity to say that we could actually understand what all of these projects entail.
No, Mr. Makhaola. I think there's an onus upon you to take responsibility that an organization like yours is not doing enough to also advance the transformation objective for black property developers. Because for you to come here on Morning Live almost 5 days after that project was officially launched in public and tell us that you only got to know about it at that point isn't good enough. Because if you don't know, I shudder to think why people would want to have membership of your organization. I'm not blaming you for not having the resources, for not being shovel ready in order to participate in such a huge project. But how could you not know about it? What is your business then in terms of assisting your members and driving transformation in the sector? I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, this is why transformation is not happening, amongst other things.
I think the criticism is taken, Sakina, and like I said, I think the onus definitely is on us to ensure that when opportunities such as these are released, that we do take a deep dive. As an organization, I think we've served our members very well thus far. I think really just the way that these projects have been released, the reality of it is that within our membership, we just weren't aware of them. The criticism is taken, and I do agree that the road is still long ahead of us in terms of the efforts that we can take to give value to our members.
So now that you have heard, as you had indicated earlier in the interview, you saw that interview yesterday with Dr. Ramokgopa, and you say that what is being said by Dr. Ramokgopa in terms of what they will demand from the project developers right now is that at least 40% of the procurement, et cetera, should be done through previously disadvantaged and, of course, female-headed companies. All of that wasn't discussed with you, is what you're telling us.
So I think, like I've said, Sakina, we did have an engagement with Dr. Ramokgopa's office 2 days ago. We have undertaken to have a workshop with them through the office of the BBC. We are an affiliate of the Black Business Council, and we are going to have a workshop. I think Dr. Ramokgopa has conceded. I think in the meeting that we did have, they did concede that there was a lot that was not communicated to industry, and therefore their processes might not have been as transparent as they needed to be. And I think that's what the workshop that we're going to be having next week is going to iron out, to ensure that when they do start to launch the subsequent projects, that our membership is aware, and that we can start adding value to those processes that they have.
So, Mr. Makhaola, moving forward, talk to us about your recommendations for future projects, especially as far as what you would be discussing with government in terms of what you think needs to be done to actually fast-track the transformation imperative.
Sakina, I think we've been quite clear in terms of asking for a minimum 40% procurement from Black, youth and women-owned companies. We've also asked that companies that are involved in projects like these should have a minimum level 2 B certificate, failing which what we're asking is that companies that are developing projects of this magnitude should show an intention to partner with Black companies and to also show some sort of skills development or skills transfer strategy that they would then be having with companies that they're working under. What we're saying is that we don't want Black people to simply be consumers of housing products, but we also want them to be involved in the value chain of production.
And then you should read the government gazettes, Mr. Makhaola. But let's leave it there. Thank you so much, Mr. Tholo Makhaola, President of the South African Institute of Black Property Practitioners, talking to us about transformation in his sector. All right, this is where we leave it for our SABC 2 viewers, Leanne. Yeah. So we are, of course, going to continue into the final hour of the show.